Hi everyone, I'm Jack from Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts about Why Did You Leave the Horse Alone by Mahmoud Darwish. Darwish is one of the great poets of the 20th century, and this volume specifically is a great introduction to his work because of how Darwish really unites the head and the heart in these poems. In many of them, he is writing of love. Now, a few of them are about romantic love, and they're incredibly passionate, but primarily Darwish is talking about the love of family, of community, of land, a yearning for home, and he wants to process loss. What does one do when a family has been broken, a community has been shattered, homes have been taken, land has been lost? How does one process that? How does one keep memory alive and cherish those memories of what once was? And in a sense, through that process, share it with oneself as sort of a reminder, but share it with other generations, with other individuals, to perhaps take that memory and put it in the future, something that could be. And so that is what makes these poems incredibly powerful. The specific imagery of Darwish's native landscape in Palestine is filling these pages. And through that, he begins this process of examining if I have lost these things, if I have lost all that I loved, if I have lost this landscape, my family's home, my family itself, what does it mean to continue? And that's one of the great poems where he begins to examine the mind. The planets did nothing except teach me to read. I have a language in the sky. Who am I? Who am I? I don't want to reply here. Perhaps a star will fall upon its image. Perhaps the forest of chestnut trees will lift me toward the galaxy at night and say, you stay here. The poem is above. It is able to teach me what it wants, like how to open a window or put my household affairs in order. Among myths, it is able to wed me to itself in time. My father is below, carrying a 1,000-year-old olive tree. It's neither eastern nor western. Perhaps he'll take a rest from the conquerors and touch me tenderly and gather lilies for me. The poem draws away from me. It enters a port of sailors who love wine and don't return to the same woman twice and don't feel nostalgia for anything nor sorrow. I haven't died of love yet, but a mother who notices the glances of her son. At a carnation fears for the vase, for her wound. Then she weeps to ward off an accident before it arrives. Then she weeps to pull me back from the perilous path, alive, to be here. The poem is what lies between a between. It is able to illuminate the night with the breasts of a young woman. It is able to illuminate with an apple 2 bodies. It is able to restore with the cry of a gardenia a homeland. The poem is in my hands. It is able to arrange the affairs of myths with the work of hands. But I, when I found the poem, dispossessed myself, and I asked it, who am I? Who am I? And there, as I mentioned, we have the specific imagery, the idea of the 1,000-year-old olive tree, and a tree that has lasted for a millennium, that has seen so many changing borders, changing lands, and yet that feels a part of his family, that it has roots deep and old, that his father is, in a sense, not just carrying it, but has now somehow joined those roots. The way that he talks about the sailors who feel nothing and don't have sorrow, and that contrast with what he is obviously feeling, and what his father felt, what his mother felt, and the way that he moves immediately into the idea that we see something beautiful, and we know that as we get close to it and touch it, we can break it. And Darwish is almost saying, this home that I had, these memories that I have are so beautiful that when I try to touch them, when I try to put them into words, am I going to somehow sully them? Am I going to, break it? And so there's a real power, as I said, even in just one of these poems in the middle of the volume. Now, I did mention that there are poems of romantic love, and it's interesting to read those in contrast. So he has one, Jasmine on a July night, a song for 2 strangers who meet on a road leading nowhere. Who am I after 2 almond eyes, he says. Who am I after your exile in me, she says. So fine, let's be careful not to stir the salt of the ancient seas in a body that remembers. She would return to him her warm body. He would return to her his warm body. Like this, the lovers, strangers, would leave their love, disheveled, the way they leave their underwear, between the sheets' petals. If you are really my lover, compose a song of songs for me, and etch my name into the trunk of a pomegranate tree in the gardens of Babylon. If you really love me, put my dream in my hands and say to him, to Mary's son, how could you do to us what you did to yourself? Sir, do we have enough justice so that we'll be just tomorrow? How might I be healed of Jasmine tomorrow? How might I be healed of Jasmine tomorrow? They surrender to darkness together in shadows that dance across the ceiling of his room. Don't be somber toward my breast, she said to him. He said, your breasts are the night that lights up the drudgery, night that covers me and kisses and fills us both up, the place and I, with night overflowing the cup. And through this, he ultimately reaches, yes, I continue my song, Jasmine, on a July night. This scent, again, the specific imagery, the way that he is embodying this feeling and trying to make that as tactile as possible within the poem. He's suffusing our senses. And that is really the power of Darwish, that he can take those images and really just plunge a reader into them and really demand our attention, demand a sensation within his poetry. And it's very powerful. When he chooses to, he begins to really draw across history, the way he had mentioned the 1,000-year-old olive tree. In a later poem, The Eternity of Cactus, where are you taking me, father, where the wind takes us, my son? As the two were leaving the plain where Bonaparte's soldiers surveyed the shadows of the old wall of Acre, a father said to his son, don't be afraid of the drone of bullets. Stay close to the ground so you'll survive. We'll survive and climb a mountain in the north and return when the soldiers return to their distant families. Who will live in the house after us, father? It will remain as it is, as it always has been, my son. And so there we have these images. He has the present conflict where the father and son are fleeing for their lives, but he draws it back to Napoleon and his soldiers there in Western Asia. He then draws it even farther back to Acre, a city that had been a key point of conquest throughout the wars and the atrocities of the Crusades, hundreds of years even earlier. And so Darwish is very careful to go in and push towards the imagery. In that song that was more romantic about lovers at night with Jasmine, he makes references to the Hebrew Song of Songs. That is what Darwish is capable of. He draws on so many references. In some poems, he references Homer. He has a whole poem that seems to be addressed towards Helen, and these reflections around what really happened. What does this loss mean? What does the conflict between, was this an example of the conflict between Europe and Asia? And how does that, make me feel as I look at what I've lost around me? Within that same poem, we get the title of this book, where the son asks, why did you leave the horse alone? To keep the house company, my son. Houses die when their inhabitants are gone. And Darwish is pushing at this idea that as long as he is here with his voice, his house, even though it may have been obliterated, still seems to exist somewhere, even if it's just in his memory. And that by putting his memories into these poems, he's in a sense making that house eternal and passing it on to posterity. The opening poem does share a real sense where it's called, I see my ghost coming from a distance. I look out like a balcony on what I want. I look out on my friends carrying the evening mail, wine and bread, novels and records. I look out on a seagull and on the trucks of soldiers changing the trees of this place. I look out on the dog of my neighbor who emigrated from Canada a year and a half ago. I look out on the name of Abu al-Tayyib al-Mutanabi, who traveled from Tiberias to Egypt on the horse of song. I look out on the Persian rose that rises up over the iron fence. I look out like a balcony on what I want. And he goes on to continue describing these things. And there's always this push and pull between the modern and the present and this past that he knows stretches back for millennia. But Darwish can also be explicitly political within some of his poems. He has one towards the end. Your Honor, I am not a soldier. So what do you want from me now? I have nothing to do with the claims of the court. The past rushed to the past quickly, without heeding a word I said. The war withdrew to a cafe to rest. Your pilots returned safe and sound, and the sky broke up in my language, Your Honor, and this is my personal affair. But your subjects are dragging my sky behind them, delighted. They peer over my heart and throw banana peels in the well. They rush by quickly. They say, good evening, sometimes. They come into my courtyard at ease. They fall asleep on the cloud of my sleep, reassured. They use my own words in my place. To address my window and the summer sweating the scent of jasmine, they repeat my own dream in my place and cry with my eyes psalms of longing and sing like I sang to the olive and fig trees, to the part and the whole in the buried meaning. They live my life as they please in my place and walk carefully over my name. And I, Your Honor, am here in the hall of the past, a prisoner. The war is over. Your officers return safe and sound. The vines spread in my language, Your Honor. And this is my personal affair when the prison cell closes in on me, the earth stretches out to me, but your subjects cry out my words angrily. They cry to Ahab and Jezebel, stand up, inherit the precious garden of Naboth. They say, God is ours, and the land of God is not for others. What do you want, Your Honor, from a passerby amidst passerby? In a country where the executioner demands that his victims praise his medals. The time has come for me to scream and to tear from my voice the mask of the word. This is a prison cell, Your Honor, not a court. I am the witness and the judge. You are the defendant. Get out of your seat and go. You're free, O imprisoned judge. Your pilots returned safe and sound. The sky broke up in my first language, and this is my personal affair, so that our dead will return to us safe and sound. And in there, Darwish is trying to express what words cannot express, the fury he has felt across his life, the fury that his community has felt, and a true examination of where has the violence come from, who has continued to push this violence against him, and this sense that he will reclaim his dignity, as so many have against regimes that are oppressive towards them. And so there is, as I said, a real power to Darwish. He is someone that, as I mentioned, if you have not read, I would highly, highly recommend just trying any of his works, really, because he continued to constantly provide that specific imagery, but really examine that specific sensation and memory as well. Now, thinking of various writers, I was reminded of some of the different poets in The Mirror of My Heart, which is an anthology of poetry by Persian women. And while there are great differences between the cultures, there are some of the images, some of the sensibilities that that are shared between the poems in this volume and what Darwish has been working on throughout the 20th century. As I had mentioned, Jack Mapange with the chattering wagtails of Mikuyu prison is one of the great sort of protest poets and political poets in Africa in the 20th century. The way that Darwish is so capable with his landscapes, with the examining the sense of cactus and dust and all of those things, reminds me of the great Virgil, both with the pastorals and the eclogues, and then the Georgics. There is, I think, a link between some of Darwish's poetry and the poems written by African Americans and collected in the African American Anthology by Library of America, specifically Audre Lorde. There is a sensibility that is very close to what Federico García Lorca was doing in many of his poems. And I would add that there's a close unity towards what Ama Ata Edu was driving at in Our Sister Killjoy, a novel, a prose poem of some sorts, but something that really wants to examine what is happening. As I had mentioned, there was a real clear reference to Homer and Odysseus, Ulysses in Darwish's poetry. And then also I would add a comparable sensibility, though working in a very different direction, would be Eduardo Galeano's Memory of Fire, one of the great novels of the 20th century, and a sort of sequence of reworked primary and secondary documents to create this tapestry of life in North and South America from earliest times through the 20th century. So let me know if you have a particular favorite poem from Darwish, and again, I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you.